Oki, and welcome to Lethbridge School Division's presentation of the 2023-2024 preliminary budget. My name is Avis Culver, and I'm the Director of Finance of Lethbridge School Division. I'm excited to walk you through the division's budget process. We will go through the following: how the division receives its funding, how it is allocated, and how it is spent. And at the end of the presentation, there will be information on how the public can provide feedback on the 2023-2024 preliminary budget. First, I would like to begin this presentation by acknowledging we are on the lands of the Treaty 7 First Nations. We acknowledge the many First Nations peoples whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations and pay respect to the land where we all live, work, and play. So how did we get to today? The budget process has many steps and pieces to its success. It starts in January with gathering information for enrollment estimates. February has the Division Town Hall where community engagement is gathered, as well as the new budget engagement survey where additional public feedback was gathered. The release of the provincial budget at the end of February gave the division its funding framework. March has meetings with the Board of Trustees and the Instructional Budget Committee to establish priorities that will be incorporated into the budget. April has school administrators and department heads allocating their expenditures in their individual budgets. May has presentations to the Board of Trustees, as well as this public presentation to ensure the division meets the May 31st deadline established by Alberta Education for budget submission. So there are a lot of moving pieces, and I would like to express my thanks and gratitude for everyone's cooperation and input as we move throughout this process to ensure funds are best being allocated to meet student needs. The Division Town Hall session held in February had over 1,000 responses answering 2 questions. In what ways are we successfully supporting students to help them grow as learners? And where do you see room for improvement in supporting students as learners? Answers were gathered, categorized, and 5 themes emerged: learning through flexibility and technology, student support and resources, opportunities, mental health and wellness, and diversity and inclusion. These themes help the Board of Trustees develop their board strategic priorities for the 2023-2024 school year, which are growing learning and achievement, leading learning and capacity building, and supporting learning and well-being. The board also created a new set of values for the 2023-2024 school year, which are learning to inspire curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, and ownership of learning in a culture of innovation, inclusion to create a safe and welcoming place where every person feels valued, respected, and can fully participate as a member of the community, well-being to foster the physical, mental, and emotional wellness of every person in an optimal learning environment, respect to uphold a culture where every person treats each other with kindness, empathy, and dignity, and leadership to empower every person to be responsible, ethical, and effective leaders in their community. As well as these priorities, the Board of Trustees developed specific beliefs in regards to the budget, which are the following: that the budget is developed in the best interest of the students, that the budget process is open and transparent, the budget will provide staffing to facilitate educational opportunities for all students, collaboration with municipalities, other boards, and community-based service agencies to effectively address the needs of all students, which promotes the efficient use of public resources, that education, especially at the primary level, is foundational to student success, funds are to be allocated to promote access to educational opportunities and resources for all students, keep division fees as low as possible, to maintain an uncommitted reserve for emergent and contingent situations, to allocate funds to specific centralized programs and services to increase opportunities for student learning, and provide targeted opportunities to further innovate practices in schools. These beliefs, along with the priorities, guide the budget decisions made for the 2023-2024 school year. A new initiative for the 2023-2024 budget year, the school division created a budget engagement survey where respondents had the opportunity to provide input into the percentage of the instruction budget that should be allocated to each area, as well as to provide feedback. 419 responses were received, and the common themes throughout the feedback were the following: inclusive learning supports, supporting teachers and students with diverse learning needs, maintaining class sizes, intervention strategies, mainly literacy and numeracy intervention strategies to address learning gaps, supporting well-being with mental health supports and other counseling services and supports, and lastly, technology and materials to support learning, more strategies to promote critical thinking and real-life skills. This feedback was considered in the development of the instruction budget for 2023-2024. Now we will discuss how the budget is funded. Student enrollment is the most significant factor in determining the division's funding. For the 23-24 school year, it is estimated that total enrollment will be 12,006 students, which is a 0.41% or 49 student increase from the 22-23 school year. High school is where the division will see the largest growth, while kindergarten is estimated to have the largest decrease of enrollment. The division is funded on a weighted moving average framework. How this is calculated is as follows. 20% of the actual full-time equivalent, or FTE, from the 2021-2022 school year. 30% of the estimated FTE from the 2022-2023 school year, and 50% of the projected FTE from the 2023-2024 school year. Please note that early education and kindergarten are 0.5 FTE for this calculation. This calculation determines that 11,353 is the division's weighted moving average enrollment for the 23-24 school year. As you can see, 11,353 is under the 11,523.5 projected for the 23-24 school year. This means that due to the weighted moving average framework, the division will serve 170.5 FTE more than it will receive funding for in 23-24. So while enrollment continues to grow and is estimated to continue to grow in the next few years, the effects of the weighted moving average will have an impact on the division's funding, which will then lead us into discussing the division's revenues. Revenue for the 23-24 school year is projected to be $141.83 million, which is an overall increase from the 22-23 budget of 1.76%. 92.5% of revenue comes from the provincial government in the form of a variety of grants, with the remaining amounts coming from the federal government, fees, fundraising and donations, also known as school-generated funds, and others, mainly reserves. The main changes from the 22-23 budget include the following. A 6% increase in the base grant rate. The base grant is 55% of the division's total revenue. A 10% increase in the supports and services grant rate, as well as the introduction of a new classroom complexity grant. A 5% increase in the plant operations and maintenance grant rate. A 32% increase in the transportation grant rate. The elimination of COVID mitigation and bridge funding, also known as hold harmless funding, which equaled $5.5 million. Funding for teacher salary settlement of $2.3 million to address the 2% grid increase to occur on September 1st, 2023. And lastly, the division has allocated the use of $798,000 in one-time reserve funding. This amount is down 81%, or approximately $3.5 million from the prior year. The reserve allocation for 23-24 are all within instruction and are being used for staffing. Continuing with revenue for the 23-24 school year, it is an overall $2.45 million increase from 2022-2023. Within this chart, it is showing the breakdown of all the funding sources of the division. Base instruction is the enrollment from K to 12. This is where the bridge and COVID mitigation funding were allocated in 22-23 and where the teacher salary settlement has been included for 23-24. Services and supports includes funding for PUF, inclusive learning, English as an additional language, Indigenous, refugees, institutional programs, and the new classroom complexity grant. Schools and facilities include plant operations and maintenance, transportation, and IMR funding, which is infrastructure maintenance and renewal funding. Community includes socioeconomic, geographical, and school nutrition grants. Jurisdiction includes funding for system administration costs. Included in the projects and contracts are all of the one-time grant allocations from Alberta Education. These include the new mental health in schools pilot program, known throughout the division as the Digital Wellness Program, and the new curriculum funding. In the prior year, the division received specific funding for the Learning Disruption Grant, known throughout the division as Boost, and a dual credit grant. Other provincial revenue include the Making Connections programming through AHS, OLEP funding for French immersion programs, Teacher pension costs are contributions paid to the Alberta Teachers Retirement Fund. Federal government funding is funding received from the Kainai Board of Education for students attending Lethbridge School Division. Other revenues include school-generated funds, which is your donations, fees, and fundraising, international students, early education program fees, and interest income on short-term low-risk investments such as GICs. And lastly, capital and debt services includes amortization. Again, to note that the prior year budget contained $4.2 million of one-time reserves. This funding was used to help with cost pressures, as well as Alberta Education has put a limit on the amount of reserves school divisions can now carry. The cap on reserves comes into effect at the end of this operating year, August 31st, 2023, and the division must be down to 3.2%, or any excess reserves will be clawed back by Alberta Education. At the end of August 31st, 2022, the division's reserve balance was 5.29%, and proper planning and monitoring has been occurring throughout the year to ensure the division will be within this target. For the 23-24 budget, $798,000 of reserves have been allocated in the budget to address staffing pressures throughout the instruction budget. So how does all this funding get allocated into expenditures? So as expected, expenditures for the 23-24 school year equal $141.83 million, which is a 1.76% increase. Staffing is 77% of the division's total budget, and Lethbridge School Division was the city's fourth largest employer in 2022. The main changes from the 22-23 expenditure budget include a 3.87% increase in certificated staffing, teachers, due to increased salary costs through grid increases, grid movement, and increased benefit costs, as well as a 3.5 additional FTE added. A 0.35% decrease in uncertificated staffing from decreased enrollment in the early education programs, which has resulted in a right sizing of the number of programs. A 1.99% increase in contracted and general services. The main increases are in professional learning, covered by the new curriculum grant, insurance, and busing costs. A 3.7% increase in supplies. The main increases are in the school-generated fund activities, which are offset by an increase in fees collected, and additional resources to be purchased with the new curriculum grant. A 9.04% increase in utilities due to carbon tax and other administrative fees, and a 6.3% decrease in capital and debt services due to a decrease in IMR funding and amortization adjustments. Additional information for staffing. 57% of the total budget is certificated staff, or teachers, and 20% of the total budget is uncertificated staff, support staff. Teaching staff is going to increase for the 23-24 school year by 3.5 FTE. The FTEs are being added to the high school level, as this is where the division is going to see the largest growth in the 23-24 school year. Support staff overall have seen a decrease of 19.75 FTE. The main reason for this decrease is within the early education program and PUF funding. Enrollment has continued to decrease, and one-time reserves in the program have been used up, so the decision has been made to right-size the program. The decrease in both EAs and other support staff reflect this. We will now dive a little deeper into the expenditures and look at each program. Programs include instruction, administration, plant operations and maintenance, transportation, and capital and debt services. 82% of the division's budget is spent on instructional services for students. The remaining 18% is spent on non-instructional support services. As part of the budget process, an instructional budget committee is utilized to allocate the funding throughout the instructional programs. The instructional budget committee includes executive council as well as administrative representatives from elementary, middle, and high schools. These representatives meet with their colleagues to determine where the biggest needs are within their school level and relay that information to the Instructional Budget Committee. The recommendations put forth by the Instructional Budget Committee include supports for inclusive learning, which has been done by allocating an additional $2.5 million from the base grant to the Services and Support grant, maintaining the counseling supports at the middle and high school levels, which had been supported in the prior year by one-time reserves. It has now been built into the operating budget for 23-24. Additional funding for counseling supports at the elementary level, maintaining elementary allocation to support cost increases, and increasing the funding to secondary schools to address enrollment growth and increase costs. The priorities of the budget and the Instructional Budget Committee guide budgetary decisions. Total expenditures in instruction for 23-24 are $116.74 million. This is a 2.3% increase from the prior year. To break that down to each program within instruction, elementary enrollment is decreasing by 147 students in K-5. Although enrollment is projected to be lower, staffing FTEs for class size needs were maintained. In the prior year, $1.4 million was allocated to elementary from the COVID mitigation funding. However, this will now be maintained through the base grant funding. Supplies decreased for furniture and equipment and general supplies due to in the prior year, some larger items were purchased with one-time reserve funding, and this won't occur again in the 23-24 year. Middle school enrollment is decreasing by 79 students in grades 6 to 8. Certificated staffing decreased by 1.5 FTE in teachers due to the use of one-time reserve funds used by a middle school to top up in 22-23 that is no longer available for 23-24. Supplies decreased for furniture and equipment and general supplies due to in the prior year, some larger items were purchased with one-time reserve funding, and this won't occur again in the 23-24 budget. High school enrollment is increasing by 277 students in grades 9 to 12. The large increase is due to the largest grade in the division in the 22-23 school year is in grade 8, and they will be moving to grade 9 for the 23-24 school year. Certificated staffing has increased by 6.7 FTE to address enrollment growth. There is a decrease of 2 FTE in support staff as 2 schools use their reserve funds to top up their staffing in the 22-23 school year, and these funds are no longer available for the 23-24 school year. Supplies decreased for furniture and equipment and general supplies due to in the prior year, some larger items were purchased with one-time reserve funding and won't occur again in the 23-24 budget. Other instructional programs include inclusive learning, technology, and other programming. In inclusive learning, changes from the prior year include an overall reduction of 15.6 FTE positions for educational assistants. This reduction is within PUF due to less enrollment and funding within this program. These decreases have been offset by increases in additional family school liaisons that are being added within counseling. Technology changes from the prior year include slight increases to computer supplies and software to keep up with demands and changing needs. There is also a $700,000 capital transfer to the Technology Evergreening Capital Reserve to help fund upgrades to technology in the future. Other instructional programming changes from the prior year include staffing increases for the new Classroom Complexity Grant and the Digital Wellness Grant. Decreases in the early education managers due to the right sizing of the early education program has also occurred in this area. Supplies and professional learning increased due to the new curricular funding grant that is also included within this area. 82% of the division's budget is spent on instructional activities. Throughout the budget process, the board's and instructional budget committee priorities and the feedback received from the budget engagement survey are in the forefront and ensured they are met. The board priorities included growing learners and achievement. This is being met through the following budget areas. Supporting early education programs with the K-12 base grant funding of $485,000. Learning loss funding, known as the BOOST program within the division, will be continued once the division knows the amount of funding it will receive from the province for 23-24. Maintaining technology evergreening capital funding to ensure planned and equitable replacements of technology. Maintaining the elementary allocation to support increased costs, and increasing secondary funding allocation to address enrollment growth and increased costs. Under leading learning and building capacity, this is being met through the following budget areas. New curriculum funding for resources and professional learning, and maintaining lead teachers to support teachers in the classroom. Under supporting learning and well-being, this is being met by the following budget areas. The new mental health in schools pilot program, known in the division as the Digital Wellness Program. Maintaining counseling supports at the middle and high school levels. In the prior year, this had been funded through one-time reserves, but for 23-24, it is now part of the operating budget. Additional funding for elementary counseling supports and new classroom complexity grants. The budget survey feedback and the instructional budget committee priorities were very much aligned. Their priorities included Inclusive learning supports. This is being met through over $2.5 million being allocated to the service and support grants through the K-12 base grant. Maintaining class sizes. This is being met by maintaining the elementary funding allocation to address increased costs and increasing the secondary funding allocation to address enrollment growth and increased costs. Intervention strategies. This is being met through maintaining the lead teachers to support teachers in the classroom and supporting early education programs with $485,000 from the K-12 base grant. Supporting well-being. This is being met through the new Mental Health in Schools pilot program, known as the Digital Wellness Program in the division, maintaining counseling supports at the middle and high school levels, and additional funding for elementary counseling supports and the new Classroom Complexity Grant. Lastly, technology and other materials to support learning is being met through maintaining the Technology Evergreen Capital Fund to ensure planned and equitable replacement of technology. As you can see, there are overlaps in each area and shows that funds have been allocated based on these priorities. Expenditures within administration total $4.25 million for 23-24, an increase of 2.26%. This amount comes from a specific jurisdictional grant from Alberta Education and increased by 0.5% after remaining the same the last number of years. Administration covers many of the legislative and operational requirements of the division and includes the following departments: the Office of the Superintendent, Business and Finance, Human Resources, System Instructional Support, and the Board of Trustees. Staffing has remained the same in these departments from the prior year. Contracted and general services increased for board costs for consultants, memberships, and additional travel. An additional cost under HR for criminal record checks, which are now required by Alberta Education for teachers every 5 years. 3% of the division's total budget is spent on administration activities. Expenditures within plant operations and maintenance total $10.75 million for 23-24, a decrease of 0.5% from the prior year. Plant operations and maintenance covers the division's responsibilities for the construction, operation, maintenance, safety, and security of all buildings and includes the costs of maintenance, caretaking, and other capital-related costs within the division. While there was a 5% increase in the plant operations and maintenance grant, in the prior year, one-time funding of $220,000 from the plant operations and maintenance reserves were used to address cost pressures in this department. These funds are no longer available for the 23-24 year. Decreases in contracted and general services, mainly decreases in building maintenance costs, are offset by increases in utilities and insurance premiums. 8% of the division's total budget is spent on plant operations and maintenance activities. Expenditures within transportation total $3.33 million for 23-24, an increase of 4.51% from the prior year. Transportation includes all activities of transporting students to, from, and between schools. The division transports over 3,900 students daily. The increase in the transportation grant rate of 32% helps cover the increase in the busing contract for the 23-24 school year. However, in the prior year, one-time funding of $300,000 from the transportation reserves was used to help with the increased cost pressures due to the increased cost of fuel. This funding is no longer available for the 23-24 school year. 2% of the division's total budget is spent on transportation activities. Expenditures in capital and debt services total $6.75 million for the 23-24 school year for a decrease of 5.1%. Within this program are amortization expenses and infrastructure maintenance and renewal, or IMR costs, associated with the funding received for the 23-24 school year. IMR funding decreased by $10,000 from the 22-23 school year, and amortization has been adjusted for the 23-24 school year. 5% of the division's budget is spent on capital and debt services. As I draw this presentation to a close, I want to thank you for your attention and participation. If you're wanting to know more, please visit our website where both the preliminary budget executive summary is posted, as well as the 2023-2024 budget infographics, which lay out the information we went over in this presentation at a very high level. As part of the budget process, we are looking for public feedback. There is a quick online survey that includes both a rating of the budget as well as a section to include any comments you may have about the 2023-2024 budget process. This feedback survey is available from Tuesday, May 23rd, and will close Monday, May 29th at noon. The feedback will then be provided to the Board of Trustees as part of the Division's board budget debate on Monday, May 29th at 3:30 p.m. Thank you again for your interest in the Division's budget process, and we look forward to hearing your feedback.